Hello, hello. Welcome to the deep end. This is the place where we explore and discuss those things and processes that life cannot do without. Now, we've taken a 13.7 billion year journey on this podcast, from the beginning of being through evolution of life to the evolution of consciousness and self-awareness. And here we are at the point of self-awareness and reflection. And today we can see that the human brain, according to a number of articles and neurological studies, that the human brain is built for predictability. Ralph Lewis of Psychology Today article he wrote said, the brain is a prediction machine. And it continues these expectations that shape many of the key features of the brain. It's this expectation, this predictability piece. Now, I was in the Coast Guard, and basically our motto was Semper Paratus, always ready. Well, to always be ready, you got to have your expectations and predictabilities in order. And it's an amazing journey that the human beings have been on. Think about this. Most studies are about, in terms of cognition, is about the past, which has to do with memory, or is about the present, which has to do with perception. The future, and as an oriented cognition piece, has not been well studied, and it's starting to be studied. And of course, this is a predictive time, isn't it? Our metadata and everything like that, trying to create our predictive models more and more closely. If you look at a hurricane coming, the predictive models over and over. The future, self-awareness. We've talked about the Garden of Eden and how that was the story of human beings waking up to their predictive ability to see that they're going to die and to know that what kills them is bad and what makes them live is good. This whole piece of predictability, what is it when one guy said, the brain looks like it is organized around forming predictions. He calls it anticipatory cognition. If it is our ability to think about a future that sets humans apart, and it's this ability that sets us apart from every other piece of life. And again, our predictive models and pieces, our ability of expectation when we go out in the morning, what kind of clothes we should wear, raincoats, do we take an umbrella? You know, and I have to admit, although I'm not a big business guy, I keep track of Wall Street and what's happening. And right now, between Israel and Ukraine, all these predictive models are at play. And the thing about this aspect of who we are, this predictability piece, it may actually help us explain consciousness itself. Because the brain is constantly modeling futures for the environment itself. As a matter of fact, in one study I read, it talked about the brain is literally creating thousands of complementary models for each object it perceives, albeit unconscious. I think about that, and I think about some of my psychedelic experiences and cascading thoughts and how they just go on fractally forever. Expectations generally shape our perceptions and our beliefs, our insight into both the brain's successes of consciousness, and it also points to many of the places that we have problematic bugs in our consciousness. And let's face it, mistaken expectations play a role in many of mental disorders. And all of us are haunted in some way by our expectations. Our low expectations, our unrealistic expectations, and of course, there's the realistic ones. And maybe it makes sense that so many studies have been done about the past and memory, because it is the past that feeds our expectations for the future. However, our past is full of incomplete pieces, it's full of bias and prejudice, and we don't always see how those get into our expectations. Expectation have been called premeditated resentments. And so many of us, we pin our hopes of happiness on fulfilled expectations. Now, I have to say, for me, expectations are somewhat provisional. I'm not dogmatic about them, although I have to say my expectation for that first cup of coffee in the morning is real and palpable. I have tried to make uncertainty a good friend. I'm holding uncertainty in one hand and expectation in the other. And I would say nary do they ever meet, but yeah, they do. They meet quite delightfully sometimes and quite brutally in others. So today I just want to talk about this aspect of being human, which has to do with our expectations and how we not just manage our expectations, but also how we break out of them. Because our expectations, in my mind, can hold us back. As an old guy, I'm getting set in my ways, and I'm trying not to be set in my ways so much that I miss the next piece of my own life while I'm still here breathing and being vertical and taking nourishment. Expectations is a big piece of human consciousness, and in this journey we've talked about the three essential processes of complexification, differentiation, and semi-permeability. And all of those are at play in the way we create our own predictive universe, where we see how to face the uncertainties in life with a certain amount of expectation that we will be able to respond to the uncertainty. So that's a whole lot on expectation. I do think that expectations and predictability is so human that we can't be human without it. So I bring this up. My co-hosts are Marianne Rudis, is coming to us from Spokane Valley. Bob Hayes is coming to us from Florida. My name is Red Hawk. This is my podcast, and we're just thinking about stuff. This is a place to wonder. I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just trying to take my life. Marianne's trying to take her life, and Bob's trying to take his life, and just saying, WTF? What if we just think about this? Where does it take us? How do we think about it? So, Bob, I'll expect you to start first. What say you on expectations?
Well, expectations are part of a larger portion of consciousness, which I'll call pattern recognition. Everything about our perception is based upon recognizing a pattern. And the thing about consciousness is, if there are holes in that pattern, we fill them in. And that's what you were getting at when you were talking about memory and how we fill in the gaps. Well, we fill in the gaps in real time also. Everything that we perceive is based upon patterns that are already established and patterns which we fill in real time. And then we test those against reality. And if we can find ways in which improve those holes that we filled, we do that. And it's a strength. It's also a very, very big weakness in our whole way in which our self-awareness works. And we have to be very, very careful of that, because that's where biases and limited experience and wish fulfillment and all of that kind of thing comes in and gets us off track of what is real in our experience. So we need to start off by being skeptical about our own perceptions as we try and work our way toward reality.
Amen. Marianne, what are your first thoughts on this?
Well, my first thought is it's amazing any of us can operate out in the world, right? Because there is so much complexity. And I love that the idea that, our expectations are something that, you're right, we do fill in those gaps. We create stories around things. We try to explain things that may or may not have an explanation based on wish fulfillment, based on things that we hope, based on stories that we've heard. But then there's also the idea that even as we're filling in these gaps, we're also trying to make sense of them. And, when our expectations can provide us with the ability to get prepared, to try and be prepared, to face the things that are coming, good and bad. But then that uncertainty piece that you were talking about earlier, Red Hawk, about, we don't really know. And then when those two things come together, that's when we have to learn to adapt. And it's that changing and that ever evolving weighing of those circumstances. And, Bob, as you were talking, I was thinking, oh yeah, we do fill in those gaps. We try to make sense of it, but then we have to be able to change and adapt. And I don't know, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, because to me, this is something that I try not to have too many expectations in life, only because I want to be able to be prepared for what is actually happening. But on the other hand, how do you go about life without planning? You have to book your plane ticket. You have to expect that the other car is going to stop at the red light, those kind of mundane things. And those are, but when it comes to like the bigger things, the greater expectations that we have for our lives and the lives of those we love, we want peace, we want happiness, we want to live in a world where we can predict, and yet we're faced every single day with proof that we can't. And so how do you manage those kind of things? And like I said, it's a wonder any of us are operating out there in the world.
Amen. And I think you put your finger on something important that, at least in an ancillary way, that addressing our expectations is a spiritual event. That this is part of the spiritual journey. And that's not to say that we dismiss our expectations, because, again, my morning coffee, I expect that. I have planned for that. and it's going to be there. But if we look at, mystical Christianity, mystical Buddhism, mystical Hinduism and Judaism, if you read Rumi, these are pieces that try to get us to live in the be here now moment without a reach for something specific in the future, and without being caught up and away from something of the past, but to be here now in a clear way. Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say that there's so many levels to expectations. I mean, we can think about, Marianne mentioned the other car stopping at the red light. You're talking about expecting to have your coffee and so forth. But those are one level. But it's when we get into interpersonal interactions, we're at a whole different level of expectations. And the biggest mistake, in my opinion, that we make is expecting the other person to think the way we do. And we base our interactions with them on that probably false expectation, because we don't know their life until we get to know them better, and we open up to each other and we share. And that's where things can go off the rails really quickly. If you expect somebody to think and behave the way you do or the way you expect them to, and then they don't behave that way, then you get into these spirals of negativity and, well, why don't you think that way?
Yeah.
And so forth. So that's where we really, really need to manage our expectations more so than just, will the sun come up tomorrow?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, if you're 40 and you're still expecting people to think the way you do, you're not 40 in your head. You're still, going into the military showed me that people do not think like I thought. I came from a collegiate basically white school, and I'll tell you what, the military boot camp was like, holy shit, what produced this person? I had one guy, he was a killer piano player, was in the band with me. He carried pictures of a thalidomide babies, so when he felt bad, he'd look at the pictures and he wouldn't feel bad. I had another guy, he joined because his wife had a baby and she was black and he was white. I had another guy that I met, he was in a menage a trois and they didn't know what to do with it. So one joined the Navy, one joined the Air Force, and one joined the Coast Guard. I was 18 and I'm going, what? So my view is that you're still expecting people, if you're 40 and still expecting people to think like you, you have taken a wrong road somewhere. No offense to our listeners or anybody else. But one of the things that both of you have implied is that there are different orders of expectation, and they're couched one inside the other, kind of like those Russian couching dolls. And they get down to the individual, but they also get down to which way is the hurricane going to go. They also get down to all these levels that have very real effects on our lives. It's interesting. Some people, my kids say that Edie and I are of one mind, and I go, no, we're not. We've been on the same track so long that, we say wow at the exact same time. We go holy shit at the exact same time. Things like that. And it's basically we're just on the same track. The expectations that happen, to me, become intuitive. And, when I read that one study that we have 1,000 complementary models for every object we perceive, how many different ways could that object go, if you will? I get blown away by that. And when I think about all the layers of expectation that you all have implied, it brings me to a place that, we have great cognitive studies of the past and the present. And before science became dominant, there was another piece called teleology, which was basically that the past isn't just causing it, the present's not just causing it, but the future is pulling us towards it. There is something there. And that expectation that there was something there pulling us was pretty much dismissed for the last 120 years or so. But psychology today is picking that up. They're starting to see, wait a minute, we need to look at what the future is doing to us and how those expectations, how our own predictability can facilitate or get in the way of the very thing we want it to serve, which is greater life, greater justice. At least I pray that's the case. Does that make sense?
It does.
Go ahead, Marianne.
Well, I was just going to say, and that just makes me think of the whole idea that everything is happening right now, past, present, and future. It's all kind of coalescing into this present. And, the way others see something, and there are different ways for all of us to view the same thing, but even ourselves, from one moment to the next, we're going to see things differently. And I think that when we look out at the world through our own eyes, we are going to see something that no one else is seeing, and yet everyone else is seeing. And it's this idea that, I just had eye surgery, and I'm just amazed at when I look out now and I see things the way that I see them that is completely different than the way I saw them last week, right? And yet, at the same time, nothing out there changed. It's all changed within me and the way I see things. You were talking earlier, Red Hawk, about how if somebody's 40 years old and they still think everybody sees the world the same way, then they haven't traveled enough, or they haven't met enough people. They haven't opened their circle enough. Well, it's the same thing within us. We're seeing things different. After this conversation that we're having today, I'm going to see things differently, right? We're all going to see things differently. And how can we predict what's going to happen? How can we have expectations of the next moment and yet still live within that, the place of wonder of what's going to happen next?
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead, Bob. You were probably a little more down to earth than me.
No, I was pretty down to earth, Mary Ann, I thought.
Yeah, that was. I count on you to pull me down to earth. Now, I was just going to say that you mentioned teleology. Carl Jung got a lot of criticism about his theories because people perceive them as teleological. What he was actually trying to say was that the patterns that we all share, he called them archetypes, because of our shared humanity, cause us to move in certain direction toward those patterns. He talked about the God pattern, for example, that we all share. We have all of these different religions and everything, and they're all different, except the fact that we all share a pattern of God deep within us. And getting back to how do we deal with people who have different expectations than us, we go back to our great spiritual leaders who basically said, approach those interactions with compassion, with openness, with generosity. Don't draw conclusions about the other, except for the fact that the other is also, I'll use the Christian terminology, a child of God, and is your brother or sister. And if you can do that, then you can shelve those false expectations and move toward filling in those blanks with more realistic ways of interacting. And it's those patterns that we can move toward, bearing in mind that we have to be compassionate in the way we look for those patterns.
Amen. And right now, Rosalind Carter's memorial service is happening. And one of the things Jimmy Carter said is, we're not a soup. We are a mosaic. And when you look across at another chip of the mosaic and it's absolutely different from you, and you back up, you begin to see how it fits. And I expect there to be models that emerge that relate to that. Now, one of the things you said, Bob, about Jung, and I think this is huge, the psyche has a pull to the future for each of us. The psyche that's the bigger part of who we are with all its deeper intents. It is moving us it's trying to move us towards greater balance, greater health, greater symmetry, if you will. It's taking the asymmetrical and high contrast pieces of ourselves and putting them in a new light that lifts them up. So I want to say that pull to the future is very real. And I will also say, I'm watching the Foundation Trilogy for the second time. I've read it. It's the Foundation Trilogy. After I read it, I realized, wow, the Bible's the same kind of gig. And that's what turned me on to wanting to read the whole Bible, which I read from front to back. And that brought some real WTFs to the front of my head. And popped a lot of my expectations and my own feelings. But the Foundation Trilogy, if you get Apple TV, I would recommend it. And it's just about what we're talking about. And when the metadata is all together and we begin to see how it works, we begin to see something that, the protagonist is Harry Seldon, who he saw in psychohistory. And I think our models of predictability are moving in the direction of trying to predict these huge orders of understanding. Now, I want to say, before I get everybody's last words, that one of the things that bugs me is when people say, well, everything happens for a reason. Maybe. But when I'm in a child's funeral and someone says that, I want to go hit them in the face. Because I don't think that's the case. I don't think it happened for a reason. I think our response can be full of reason. But I think the universe is full of these random pieces. Like in predictive models, we can tell you how many people are going to get cancer, what kind of cancer they're going to get, but we can't tell you who's going to get it. And the models of predictability that we have are so facilitating that we can sometimes get lost in them and create narratives that cut us off from other aspects of our life. And I know in my life, my own expectations have dragged me down sometimes and kept me from reaching into a universe that might be not as comfortable, but bring more fruit, if you will. So that's my final ugh of something that I hear so often, and it bugs me because there's this uncertainty that's walking hand in hand with our expectations, and the brain is trying to create predictable models that allow us to live at least with a modicum of security and relaxation and all those things. Now, having said that, Marianne, final comments?
Yeah, I was going to say it is amazing that how we can predict certain things and in statistics and percentages and how they play out. But on our individual, you use the example of, so many people are going to get cancer, but we don't know which ones. And I think that's something to really keep in mind, and also gives us a sense of power over our own lives too. If we can have some of this predictability, if we can be assured of certain things, and yet at the same time we have to be able to embrace that uncertainty and be able to adapt to things that fall outside of what we expect. And be open, because we can be blind to those things as well. We can blind ourselves. We can refuse to see things that don't fit our expectations. And so if we can somehow open ourselves up to the possibility that there's a variety of ways to see a single circumstance.
Amen. And that's three-dimensional thinking, what you just described, looking at it from all sides. If only we could institute that at all levels of leadership and government and business. Bob, final comments?
Well, let me stir it up a little bit by saying that most of our expectations are unconscious. We don't really have control over them. We don't sit down and say, well, I'm going to go into this situation with this expectation and this expectation. All of that is deep within our unconscious mind that affects our behavior just as much or more than our conscious mind, which gets me back to the idea that if we can increase our openness, the bandwidth of compassion, of attempting to understand others with no expectations, then we have a better chance of getting things right, because we can't control what we can't control.
Amen. Not only that, we don't even know what we can't control until it controls us pretty radically. Then we go, oh my God. So, I've been thinking about some stuff, and I have to say this podcast is really an extension of my own wondering and thinking and contemplations, and I like it. And what I've been thinking about lately, especially, and I didn't bring up Advent and other religious events that deal with expectation and predictability and preparation for those. But there's something that human beings have done. We've created this universe of heaven and hell after life, or reincarnation after life. Some of the New Age people are, they're free-roaming spirits after life, all different kinds of ways. But where did the idea of an afterlife come from, really? And this is what I've been thinking about. And I've been going in and reading different texts, and none of them really address this. I think what happened was the early people, when animism was still the reigning spiritual perspective, someone died, and that night they had a dream and they saw the person. Remember, children can't distinguish the difference between out there and in there. Early human beings probably couldn't distinguish between out there and in there. And what they saw, I saw my dad last night. I had a conversation with him. All of a sudden, people die and they're still hanging around. Is this where the whole idea of an afterlife came from? I don't know, but I know this. My expectations are sure messed up when I think about all this. My friends, blessings. Blessings.